Holy hammer of Sigmar, did they get the Doom Sandworm in the game? Yeah, I need to make a video about this guy. We are closing in on 10 years of Total Warhammer, and I'm sure we've seen a crazy range of monsters. We've got the classic fantasy stuff like dragons, griffins, tree people, giant beasties like a bear made out of ice, mammoths, or just a big effing spider, dinosaurs wearing artillery and even more dinosaurs on them, and we even have different flavors of magical mechas. The demonic ones, the zombie ones, the Egyptian ones. And just when I thought we've seen it all, the Dreadmole joins the party. Now the Dreadmole's design isn't anything new, it's just a sandy worm, and there's been plenty of sandworm designs in other franchises like Dune, but the gameplay it brings to the table, that's where the real fun comes in. Now let's start with looking at the Dreadmole's unit card. On paper, it has a crap ton of HP at almost 10,000. Decent armor, decent leadership, high attack, low defense like a lot of single entity monsters, armor piercing weapon strength, not the highest but still decent, and also a range attack as well. 150 missile strength is on the low end of things, but still armor piercing and poison, also poison at melee attacks. With the tanky-ish stats and immune to flanking, missile resistance due to scaly skin, plus a bit of a melee damage reflection ability, it can stay in combat and take some punishment. Also has Vanguard deployment, able to ambush enemies from a hidden angle. Speaking of hidden, the interesting thing about the Dreadmole is that it cannot move normally when surfaced. It can only move while burrowed underground, and while it is underground, it cannot be targeted either by melee attacks or missiles. This is the new underground trait for the Dreadmole and Dreadmole only so far. And you can see that while it is burrowed, it is hidden from the enemy's eye, stalking in plain sight, which means the Dreadmole brings a very unique tool to the table on the Norscan roster, mostly filled with big burly monster that will crush through the enemy front lines, while the Dreadmole, while being sneaky, is still very powerful indeed. Now, unlike the Tomb Scorpion, which temporarily burrows underground during the charging animation, the Dreadmole actually does travel through the underground, so it can't be touched and can move straight through enemy formations, and once it is in position, it will burst onto the ground using the surfacing ability, which does a bunch of AoE damage to the infantry and cavalry blobs surrounding it, and then follow up with extra melee attacks as well, though to be honest, I think the melee attacks themselves have rather lackluster damage. There's also the deep tunneling ability for relocation, essentially a teleporting ability with decent range. Can act as an emergency relocation ability to move the Dreadmole out of trouble, also does a bunch of surfacing damage as well. The interesting thing is that because the burrowing, surfacing, and also the deep tunneling are abilities and not movements, so they actually ignore nets and allow the Dreadmole to escape from enemy attacks. Weird enough though, silence can disable these abilities, so if you're bringing the Dreadmole against something like say Khorne and they brought Karanak, or against Kislev and they brought the Golden Knight, then the chances are your Dreadmole will be stuck. They can't move overground and they can't go back underground either. Now let's have a look at the potential uses of the Dreadmole on the battlefield. The most obvious one is definitely formation disruption, dropping a terror-causing monster into their formations, doing some good damage when it bursts out of the ground, and quickly shocking them into a rout. To make things worse for the missile troops, they can't do anything about it until the Dreadmole reveals itself. Remember, the Dreadmole cannot be targeted when it is underground. So if your opponent sees the Dreadmole, that means it's already where it wants to be, and the attack has already begun. I can't wait to see it popping up in the middle of a Cathay box or other missile or artillery boxes, which Norsca can sometimes struggle against. Another great thing about the Dreadmole is that the abilities on this monster, the surfacing, burrowing, and deep tunneling, have relatively low cooldown, so it can burst out of the ground, mess with the enemy units, and then either dive back into the underground or jump to a different position and disrupt another unit, doing great damage to their concentrated units. This makes the Dreadmole a very nice addition to the Norscan army. Previously, only the Furrow Manticore and the Chaos Frost Dragon can fly over enemy defenses and bypass them before dropping into the enemy formation. But the Dreadmole can now do exactly that, just that it is going underneath but not above. And on top of that, at only 1000 gold cost, only 200 gold more than the Furrow Manticore and 500 cheaper than the Chaos Frost Dragon, it offers almost 10,000 HP. A lot tankier than these puny flyers. And don't forget, you can't trap a Dreadmole like you trap a flyer. You can't pin it down with monsters of cavalry, and you can't net or snare it either. Of course, things are different if you have something to deny it from using its abilities like Silence or Rampage, but not every army has access to those. Aside from dumping them into enemy formations, another way to play with the Dreadmoles is to use their missiles to poke at enemies. The range is pretty long at 200, so longer than most missile infantry. They can pop up outside of enemy shooting range and poke with the spit, so forcing your opponent to play whack-a-mole with these sandy worms. But then again, the missile strength of this unit is a bit weak, so probably not the main way you want to use them. One thing the Dreadnoughts should be able to do is to get past city walls. Now, unfortunately, burrowing is a very new mechanic to Total Warhammer as a whole, so there are still some kinks needs to be ironed out. One of them is that the Dreadnoughts can't actually move past city walls right now, not normally at least. You can see I can't actually issue any movement order behind the walls and into enemy territory, but still you can bypass it with the deep tunneling, just that you need to surface them onto the ground first and then pop the deep tunneling ability behind enemy lines. For now, this issue isn't easily fixable because even when tunneling, the Dremel is still considered a land unit and it can't pass through city walls like flyers do. Seems like this issue will remain for some time, but it's not like it's a big issue to be a fun killer. You can still get them through the walls, just with a couple extra steps. Now once the Dremels get past the walls, they can burrow back underground and start moving within the enemy settlement. Of course, they can't get onto walls like flyers, but they are still a very nice addition to the Norskin sieging toolkit. Now for the weaknesses of this unit. The first main problem is that the Dremel can't actually move over ground, so its targets can easily move away, rendering it unable to attack. Excluding the spit, of course, which is rather low damage anyways. If the Dremel pops up at the wrong place, it'll have to wait for its abilities to cool down before it can use them to adjust its position. And of course, your opponent won't just sit there and take the damage like the AI, so you have to make sure to follow up with some other unit to try and capitalize on the disruption caused by the Dremel, like your Hounds and Wolves or your new Cavalry. And finally, the biggest downside of the Dreadnoughts, they do not return after rout. As soon as their leadership dips past 0, they're gone. So that means even if the Dreadnoughts are relatively tanky, you'll still have to be really careful with where you place them. You don't want to expose them to too much risk, and you definitely do not want to leave them unattended. Overall, I think the Dreadnought will be a very fun monster to play with. It has a very specific role on open field battles to disrupt and dish out damage against infantry blobs. Of course, Norska already has plenty of anti-blob tools like Burning Head, Pit of Shades, Purple Son of Zeruz, or Wolfric's Boat, so Dreadnought's function will be more disruption focused, being a relatively cheap Pterosaurus that can bypass enemy defenses. Certainly it will have a lot of fun moments in campaign having the ability to bypass city walls. Unfortunately, it does suffer from being a unit with a new mechanic. Hopefully CA will be able to fix them soon, but still this doesn't mean the unit is bad or anything. I'm still glad it's being added to the game, and I honestly really like this new monster on the Norskin roster. For multiplayer, I'm expecting more to see them becoming a cool unit to break missile boxes and punish tight static formations without being exposed to Overwatch fire on their way into the fight like something say a Mammoth or a Manticore. I think it'll open up some fun tactical options for the faction and of course for Chaos as well, who gets to steal the Norskin new toys for themselves. What are your thoughts on this new unit? Leave a comment down below and share your opinion.